careful, you will be preaching soon. I know, that's right. Well, absolutely, absolutely. Well, for those who don't know me, my name is Nick. I'm actually one of the pastors here. It's been a while, so I wanted to first say thank you. Thank you so much. This last month, I've been on vacation, so thank you to the elders for their support of me in encouraging use of vacation. And so for over 3 years since I've been here, just that support of the elders to go, yeah, you've got family in Australia, go visit, spend time. And so to be able to be away for a month, certainly we have an incredible leadership, our elders here. But it wasn't just them. They certainly are supportive, but our staff is incredible. And so would you give it a hand for the staff that led this last month in a kind of a funny way? People are asking, what kind of fires are you going to come back to and things like that? I'm like, what are you talking about? Cheryl's got this under control, right? Fine. But it was so good these last 2 weeks. I mean, Robbie does a phenomenal job preaching and leading, and Cody is new, but leading worship. It's like, see ya, good job, you got it. Bill is not only running Pro Presenter, but working with Sarah over the preschool. They've added 2-year-olds now, so the preschool goes even younger. So phenomenal to see that. All that's taking place, the certification there. Sarah put a ton of work in. And then I got text while I was away because some of you served at kids camp. And they text us going, Michelle and her team did an incredible job. So Michelle did amazing. Then you've got Bella and Will and Edwin was back here and back there somewhere, and Jack is floating around, and Ty, and I'm gonna leave people out. Margot's in the back there and saved us a bunch of money in financial world that for some of you that know about, but I'm leaving some people out. But as I just think through all those different names, it's a privilege to be a part of the team. So as I come back and I think about trying to summarize what took place in Australia over a month, it's hard to summarize that. So I wanted to pick out just one highlight before we go too far, because I spent time with my family in Brisbane. That's where my wife is from. We spent some time traveling south. It played around on the coast and then went north and was on the coast for a bit. But then I took one photo that says no personal, fun, sentimental value, but it was hilarious to me, so hopefully you find it fun. I was on the beach in Australia. Remember, it's their winter, and I was watching my kids play in the surf, and then I looked at the lifeguard, and this was them. Oh. Nope, this is not them. We've got fun technical difficulties. There is a picture that is on the screensaver on my phone, which is a little small to show you. But let me describe it to you. It is a lifesaver, so they've got the full get-up of all the red, but the guy is wearing full sweats and sweatshirt and a beanie. And it's like 75 degrees. This is a picture. They don't have this in the back, but what I did with our family, we made some family videos. I took a video of him, and then I scanned the beach that was empty until you got to my kids playing in the ocean. Then I put the phone down and ran out and played with them. And so it was just fun to make those kind of family memories and enjoy that and realize that we were the crazy people from out of town that didn't realize you're supposed to wear a beanie because it's cold. But when it's bathwater, and I'm from Seattle, where if it's 70 degrees, you put the sprinkler on and play, this was phenomenal. So there's so many different things like that will be memories for years for our families. And we loved our time. We loved our time. So today, as we jump in, we're going to kick off a new series for this summer. And we're starting a new series called The Story. The Story, from creation to new creation. The Story. I'm excited to get into this because the goal of this series is to move us continually from a place where we see the Bible as something to think about to use the Bible as something we think with. I know I've said that before, but more than just seeing the Bible as a thesaurus of information to go when we need it, but to instead see it as a lens, as a story that fully embodies us, that brings clarity to our own life and the world around us. It is the story. The Bible is not just a book of stories, but it is my story, your story. So looking at the title, Story, when you think about what story is. Stories are powerful. Stories are actually how we make sense of the world. A story, to define it simply, is a description of a series of events in a way that gives meaning or purpose to them. You do this. If you grew up with a number of siblings, you have the same childhood that's probably been told in a very different story. Here's an example. I have a brother who's 5 years younger than me. And when we talk about our childhood, there are similar events that we describe differently if we're in a social situation, right? I describe how wonderful I was as a middle schooler in letting my younger brother play with me and my friends. My brother pipes up and goes, hold on, I was there. I remember when you and your friends picked on me when you were in middle school. I'm like, I don't remember that. Same events, facts, but the story brings meaning to it. And so we tell these stories. Now I'm really nice to him because he's 6'1" and is like a bodybuilder. So we're in good terms now. Whatever you want, Daniel. Story brings meaning. Story brings meaning and purpose. Knowing God's story doesn't just mean now you're free to make your own, but instead knowing God's story means your story now makes sense within his. So we want to understand God's story, so we understand our story within his story. When we understand God's story, we start to see it show up all around us. And so here's what we want to do. We want to take the story from Genesis to Revelation, from creation to new creation, and look at the story of Scripture over 7 weeks. So here's the outline. We'll take 7 weeks with these 7 images. So if you saw the graphic before, there's 7 subtle images. Let me highlight those for you. Here's what they stand for. Different people do this different ways. This isn't necessarily new with me, but here's what we're going to do. There's a triangle. This is going to be week 1. We're going to look at creation. Genesis 1 we're going to look at today. So as we look at creation, there's 3 things, 3 sides of a triangle, 3 foundational elements of the story of Scripture that's important for us to understand all the way to the end. So Genesis 1 and 2, we're really going to look at that creation. Next week, we look at the X. We look at rebellion. Where did sin enter in? Why did humans rebel against God? Genesis 3 is the emphasis of next week. Then you see this arrow. You see a promise. There is a promise that's embedded in Genesis 3, that's said in Genesis 12, that's then repeated all throughout the Old Testament through the ups and downs in the story of God's people, that have ultimately that promise arrives in the cross, in the person of Christ. Christ's life, death, burial, resurrection, ascension. So Christ becomes a pivotal hinge within the story of God. And then after Christ, we see another arrow pointing forward. We see the mission. That's why we have much of the New Testament, book of Acts, different letters that are written to point us. We have a mission as the people of God. And that mission leads us into the future. And we see this check. This check is judgment. This is when God makes what's wrong right. That's when there will be an accounting for evil in a way that so many of us long for now. Don't worry, God's going to make it right. And then finally we return, but yet it's new to new creation. The end of Revelation, we see picture of the glorious new creation of God coming down to be with his people. There's no longer a sun needed because of the brightness of God's glory dwelling in our midst, and it's incredible. And the language that's used by the time to end of Scripture is a vision given to John, and he's writing, and we're not to necessarily read it exactly like, well, I think there's going to be gold laid in the streets. No, it's the things that are as valuable as gold are just seen as pavement. The brilliance of heaven, of the new creation of when God comes back and makes all things right. It's incredible. This is the story of Scripture from creation to new creation. And as we walk through all of that together, we're going to highlight different sections. So we're not going to, maybe you can. We're not going to encourage you, but I shouldn't say that. I'm not going to discourage you, but I'm not saying you have to read all of Scripture in 7 weeks. That'd be cool. Some of you can do that. But what we want to do is do a flyover to capture the story of God in 7 weeks. There's different ways that people do this. There's others that do it, and they do it in 6 images, and they just take the last 2 and collapse them. There's some that do it in 4. I like the language sometimes where there's 4, where they talk about creation, rebellion, redemption, restoration. So there's different models there. But for us, we're going to walk through 7. And I just want to highlight where some additional reading, since I've been off for a month. It's been fun to read. So here's a few things that you might pick up yourself. This one is probably the most accessible. It's called The Great Story and the Great Commission. Unapologetically, I think it's chapter 2 or 3 in here. If you read chapter 3, you're going to see all 7 of those with a couple of paragraphs describing each one. So this is a great read. The great story and the Great Commission, I'll have it up front here if you want to take a look at it afterwards as well. But it just goes into some of the thoughts here of how do we do this. Some of the staff are reading this. Our elders have gone through some of this together as well. So just a phenomenal read. If this one you're like, oh, come on, Nick, there's a little bit more. If you want something a little thicker because you have more time and you're bored, The Mission of God is a phenomenal, this is like my favorite theology book. It's Christopher Wright, The Mission of God. Phenomenal book that then goes even deeper into some of these themes. There's my literary detour for a moment. So let's jump into the first part of God's story. Let's jump into this. To begin our story, we first see God as creator. And I want to read the beginning of Genesis, the beginning of our story. I'm going to take a little bit of extra time to read the first whole chapters. Many of you have probably read Genesis 1. Maybe some of you have never sat and listened to it, or maybe some of you spent a long time. So it's not going to be on the screen behind me, but I just want to read this entire chapter and just listen. Listen with wonder to what our God has done. Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. There was evening and there was morning, the first day. God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered into one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to the various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years, and let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters teem with living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth, subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing, so that on the seventh day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. God is the creator. God is the creator. This is the first part of our story, the first part of our triangle. God is creator. When you just step back and think through that, it is incredible that God creates everything. In Australia, we went to the Australia Zoo, and just looking at some of the ridiculous animals. Like, what was God thinking when he made a giraffe? And kangaroos look ridiculous, and koalas always sleep. And why are all the deadly snakes in Australia? Like, there are just such a variety of animals. The conservation work that zoo is doing is phenomenal to continue to allow these species around the globe to survive. It's incredible just to imagine, to step back and think through all of creation in a blow through in that chapter. God is the creator. And so there's the first line of this chapter that pulls that out. I want to focus on that for just a minute. Genesis 1:1 on the screen. It says this. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." So at this point, reading through Scripture, you start on this line, you hit research, and you do some theological research, and you suddenly realize there is so much controversy over this first line. We haven't even gotten into the text yet. There are hundreds, thousands, possibly millions of pages written about these few words, just a few words in Hebrew. All the ramifications that are here. So as we look at this, there's a couple of things that just jump out. This chapter, as we look at the beginning, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We're seeing that foundationally for us, there's no place for pantheism within the Christian worldview. Pantheism meaning God is nature. God is not in nature. There's a distinctness of God from nature, transcendent. He's distant from. He's also immanent, close, and involved with, but he is distinct. And so you see here from the very beginning, God is distinct from nature, which is different than you see from other Mesopotamian creation myths that are written around the same time. So here we see God is distinct. Also, here when we see this, my view is that this opening line reads as it kind of functions as a statement. There's like a superscription and a summary of what's about to come. You see this throughout Genesis. Elsewhere in Genesis, sections are introduced with, "These are the generations of," and then it gives a list. Here at the very beginning, I believe here you see like a header that then describes what is to come. And so the author writes, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And then picking up in verse 2, now you begin to see how is this working itself out. So you see, this is the summary of what is about to take place. And so what takes place? Let's look at verses 2 and 3. "Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said," God speaks. God now brings in order out of chaos. We start to see details here. The first 3 days, you see parallel with the final 3 days in the way that it goes from generality to more specifics in the way things are created. He's bringing order out of this chaos, out of this void as he works through creation. Now, it's interesting. It's claimed by many historians that the creation story of Genesis 1 is a deliberate repudiation and kind of a it's getting rid of the myth. It's been a while. I've been doing a lot of reading, so it's in my head, not in my mouth. That it's countering the myths of the time that would allow a local group of Mesopotamians to see their gods as creators. And so when you read like the Mesopotamian creation myth, I spent some time reading that this week. You see reading in Enmu Elish, when you read in there, you see a very similar trajectory in the writing at the beginning of Genesis. You see out of this chaos, creation coming. But out of the chaos, you see the gods arise, and then you see out of those gods, warring taking place, and then them starting to create some order, and then humans are created to serve them. The humans are there to bring food to the gods. So what a lot of people see is that this is written very much aware of that myth in a way to say, no, this is our creator God. This is how he created. This is, he was not one of the in the chaos that he, because of his warring, became like Marduk, the king of the gods, in a way that was able to strong arm others. But no, God, in order, out of speaking, brought this earth into existence. Now, the thing that's fascinating about this is that I love how Gunkel summarized this when he said Genesis 1:1 in this section is completely unique. He says the cosmogonies of other people contain no word which would come close to the first words of the Bible, which are, in the beginning, God. You just don't see that in other ones at the time. And you can imagine for the first hearers of this, the rock of stability that it would give them to stand on, when they're shaped as the people of God and following after him and seeing him do the wonders in their midst. And he said, this is how the world came into existence. I am your God. In contrast to all the others out there, this is how things happen. I was before it all. I spoke it into existence. And so when the first people that would hear this thousands of years ago, and they were the people of God, and they were drawn to other pagan gods, and they would then hear from the Babylonian gods, here's how their creation myths went. No, our God created everything. It reminds them when they're going to be drawn off to worship others, our God is creator over all of it. And when you read the other myths around creation, you see that humans are to serve the gods. But here, the pinnacle of creation, you actually see God creating mankind and providing food for them, which just flips it completely on its head. So as much as there's connection with the other creation myths of the time, it stands completely distinct because God is other than his creation. God is above his creation. God is intentional in creating out of order. And so you see God here as creator. Now this also speaks life to us today. Because when we remember this as the beginning of our story, that God is creator, that God is the one that provides everything, it can help in the same way it did the first hearers, us remember that when we're drawn by the other gods of our culture, by that promotion at work, that promise of money, that promise of this other thing, we don't think of gods in our culture as like, well, I'm going to go run off and worship Marduk. Nobody's really tempted to do that. But what other things are you willing to place your trust and dependence on to provide for you? Name that. Call it a god, and then go, ooh, am I worshiping that? And so here we're reminded, our God is creator over everything. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, as the psalmist says in Psalm 24. So here, the creation helps those first hearers to remember how sovereign and majestic their Lord is in contrast to those cultures around them by being distinct to the cultures around them and yet similar enough for them to see the comparisons and how God is above what they've heard in the culture. Now, another challenge that comes when we read these very first lines in Genesis 1 is that it doesn't initially seem to address some of the questions that we have today reading Genesis 1. Like, when did this happen? Or how? like, okay, there's like the cool poetry. How did this work? And often, people read this and go, well, it didn't say there was no word evolution in that first chapter, so clearly it's not aware of current discussion. So all of these things are like, well, what do we do with this? Well, this is an interesting quote from the end of The Origin of Species. Charles Darwin wrote it. So at the end of his book, he wrote, "There is a grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one." And Charles Darwin, there's a lot written about him and passion both ways, all about his upbringing and where he landed and things. But out of his own words, it's amazing to see his pursuit to see biologically order in the world around us comes from his recognition that it was originally breathed into nature by the Creator. Interesting. So the word evolution has a strange effect on people, particularly in church. Evolution, my observation is that when evolution is lifted out of a biological scientific method environment, when it's lifted out of that and it instead refers to a worldview that eliminates the possibility of anything divine, that's where I believe evolution becomes troublesome, because that's in conflict with the Christian worldview at that level. But when evolution stays in the scientifically tested hypothesis world where it belongs, I think that's a phenomenal pursuit to understand the majesty of how our Creator God initiated all things. And there are incredible Christians that pursue scientifically, how did God create? What did this look like? And there are Christians that pursue God and look at him as sovereign creator, 100% believe in Genesis 1 that said it was 10,000 years ago, and others that say it was 4 billion years ago. And the win is less important, because when we look at Scripture, Genesis 1 is not a biological textbook. It is written to remind us of the sovereignty of God, that he breathed life into everything. God existed before everything. When we look at this, we see this foundationally in our story is God is the initiator. And then we put everything down at that scientific level to study and investigate and look at, if God is a God of order, then let's find what is the order? How did he do that? And let's explore that and study that, and constantly in reverent awe of our Creator God. Because Genesis 1 tells us he is the creator over all things. Genesis invites us into a wonder and the majesty of creation, reminding us God is creator. God is creator. And this is a theme picked up by other authors in Scripture. So I'm not going to go into all of these passages, but if you want, here's a few other passages you could write down that kind of fit in the same theme. A few other passages are Psalm 19, Psalm 95, Psalm 104, sections of Isaiah 42. There's verses in Job 38, Matthew 6, particularly 26 through 30. Revelation 21:1 are just a few that pick up on this theme that's significant throughout the entire story of God, that God is creator. He initiated everything that we see around us. So that's just like the first two verses. Okay, this is going to take a long time. Okay, but let's jump ahead. Our second point, not only is God creator one side of the triangle, but the other one is humans were created in the image of God. So let's jump ahead later in chapter 1. God takes the chaos, brings order day upon day until we get to day 6. We see humans created in the image of God. Genesis 1:27 says this. It said, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Another side of our triangle that is a significant foundational piece that helps us understand the rest of the story. So at the very beginning, we're seeing God as creator, and now very early we're seeing about humanity. We're made in the image of God. Men and women made in the image of God. What is the image of God? Again, thousands of pages written about this all over the place, and this could be a whole 9-week series, and someday we probably should. So I'm going to summarize it in 2 minutes. The fascinating thing about the image of God, it's defined out here within the passage without like a specific aspect of our capacity. There's nothing here that says it's because you can do this, you're now in the image of God. But it's simply bestowed on us. Genesis 1:26 simply is saying that to be human is to bear the image of God. And so some people try to put that in one aspects of different people, whether it's physical, spiritual, intellectual, relational, other aspects of capacity to love or others. And all of these things I think are trying to scratch at what is the image of God. But when we look here, we're named as humans as made in the image of God. Simply to be human is to be endowed with value. So if you walked in here today and you're wondering, am I worth anything? I fail at everything. And somebody might try to encourage you and you just internally go, you don't really know me. God says, you're made in his image. You have value simply because you are human. God desires a relationship with you, which we're going to see through this whole story of Scripture. Is his invitation for us to know Creator God, made in his image. And we see some of the functions, some of what we're called to do that give purpose and meaning in this story. And so he says for humans, there's two things, specifically in verse 28, be fruitful and then rule. So there's aspects of our humanity that matter. Be fruitful. I was talking to my son about this, and because I told him I wasn't sure how I would feel if I could preach today, if he'd be ready to be my backup. He's like, I got it, Dad. I'm like, well, preach. Let's see what happens. It was sweet. But we got to this Genesis part, and it's like, be fruitful. I'm like, yeah. You know how at school, so I'm like, there's two dads, and you get your mom and your two women that marry. Yeah, whoever wants to get married gets married. But the cool thing is, like, when you look at Genesis, part of the purpose of marriage is being fruitful. And so he's like, yeah, so it's got to be like a mom and a dad. Yeah. So Genesis starts to speak even at that foundational level of what comes purpose-wise in humanity. So a man and a woman would marry in a way to be fruitful. Now, if you cannot have kids, it does not mean you're not made in the image of God. So let's not get it twisted because people move it in a weird direction. If you're single, it doesn't mean you're not made in the image of God. Now, you're made in the image of God, but there's a purpose, men and women. So you see this fruitful, have families. That's a good thing. That's why we want to celebrate what God's doing through the kids and life and vibrancy here at the church. And then rule. Rule over, create dominion, build stuff. Some of you business owners, and you get your hands dirty, you start growing culture and stuff around you. You care about your employees, whatever. Like, that's good. That's built into us as humanity. Work is not a result of the fall. Work is before. So work is a good thing. So we see these are some of our functions out of it, but even before that, what makes us made in the image of God? God created us and said, humans, you're made in my image. And we want to know, well, how? Well, what? What about me makes me special? And he goes, you're special. You're special. That's foundational to the story of Scripture. God is creator. Humans are made in the image of God. And then as we look down, we get in Genesis chapter 2, it starts to retell the story and narrows in on men and women in the creation here. In 2:18, it specifically says regarding the woman that there was an aid fit for Adam, an aid fit for him. God looked around at all the other creatures have been made and realized Adam needs one like him. The traditional helpmate is very adequate in its translation, but sometimes subject to confusion. Because sometimes helpmate which is based on this passage, that the Hebrew literally means like alongside, in coordination as one like him. So this helpmate. So a wrong reading of this would be a helper, like an assistant, subject to, like they came less subservient. God I got to whip something together quickly. Like, that's wrong. The correct would be co-rulers. Clearly seeing somebody like him thematically. A wrong reading was that because man was created first, they rule. Now, the interesting thing about that is when you look at the theme of Genesis, that's actually backwards. Nobody argues this. But you see from chaos to order, from what needs fixing to clarity. And so if you look at it, well, man was made and then actually he got it right with women, so they should lead. Nobody argues that. So don't argue order. That doesn't work, okay? The right reading is the order of creation doesn't indicate status. King David was the youngest. Joseph was young in the family. So here we see men and women made in the image of God to co-rule together. And you see this beauty of how God's made men and women. And it focuses in on Genesis 2 to remind us we're made in the image of God. Foundational to understanding. So first, God is creator. Second, humans were created in the image of God. Third, the earth is God's good creation. The earth is God's good creation. It belongs to God. Psalm 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Psalm 115:16. It's God's intention for us to work, to care for, cultivate the earth. And when you look at Genesis 1:31, here's what it says. To end this chapter, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. God made the earth. How do you feel about something that you've made? I feel pretty proud about it. Like, yeah, I like to take a photo once in a while, and I did that. Like, I print it and put it on the wall, and people are like, oh, did you make that? I'm like, yeah, clearly not professional. I feel good about it. Like, I made that. Now, our house did some remodel. I got my hands dirty, and I redid the island. I feel pretty proud about that. You've probably made some things where you're pretty proud about those things in a good way. God made the earth. He cares about it. And this is important, the foundational element at the beginning of our story. It's important to remember that God cares about his planet. He created it. It's actually interesting in Colossians chapter 1, Paul is fighting against Gnosticism, which is this idea that there's physical and there's spiritual, and your physical doesn't matter at all, so just really focus on the spiritual. And he goes, no. So he counters some of that directly head on in the beginning of Colossians, starting in verse 15. He talks about Jesus being the creator, and he holds all things together, visible and invisible. He's going, these things matter together. So we should care about these things. We should care about these things. So God cares about his earth. It's worth us remembering that God's creation, it matters. This is the beginning of our story. There's much more of the story to come that will build upon this. But foundationally, at the beginning of the story, God is creator. Humans are made in his image. The earth is the Lord's. He created. It's good. As we look into future weeks, we're going to see where does the story go and build upon and remember those things. And so this week, this is a simple challenge for this week. If we're looking at the story together, I believe for many of us, it would be helpful to reread the beginning of the story, to know the beginning. Have you ever stepped into a movie and missed the first 10 minutes? Wow, it takes a while to catch on. It really does. I mean, it's amazing. Those first few minutes, they really make those critical. And so for us to read Genesis, and maybe it's been a while, or maybe you've read it recently, but read Genesis 1 and 2 every day in a different translation. You can download the YouVersion app and do that. If you don't have different translation, that's okay. Use the whatever translation you've got just over and over. My encouragement, it doesn't take more than a couple of minutes. I mean, I read the whole thing here for us. Just took a couple of minutes. Read it every day, because this is a story that more than just something we've heard about and wondered about or kind of vaguely understand, to allow it to more and more be a part of who we are. So as we look around, we go, wow, God, I'm struck by the wonder of you as creator. And see how that starts to put in right standing different issues around us where we feel like, wow, that's a really big issue. Well, my God created everything. It's still a big issue, but not as big as it was before. Wow, I feel worthless. Oh, I'm creating an image of God. What does that mean? God just says it. Why? How? Am I worth it? God just says it. To let that more sink into who we are. So let me pray. God, I thank you. I thank you that you are creator God. You are creator God. You are before all things. You spoke and things came to life. You invite us to pursue understanding what that looks like. Thank you for brilliant minds throughout history that have continued to investigate and pursue the understanding of your good world. God, we want to remember you as creator. You as creator who then create us in your image. God, would we value others as image bearers of you? God, before we do anything, you say we are valuable. So thank you. Would we find our right relationship with you and live in that? And this earth that we live on, God, there are so many things that we can enjoy. Would we be good stewards of the world around us that you've given us to care for? God, this is just the beginning of your story. We are grateful for what you've done.